You need to get better at putting tools in there that benefit you to determine what vulnerabilities really do exist in that machine that I just installed. What's that going to look like in a year? What's my remote access look like to that machine? Who's making changes in my control system? What's going on in that plant that my machine center is communicating with? Do I have malware in there already that I need to be concerned about as an OEM that the client's not dealing with? All of those things need to be put on the table to demonstrate, in order for me to do a better job in assisting you to run this piece of equipment, maintain this piece of equipment, I got to bring these tools to the table.
Hey, I'm Dino Busalachi, the Chief Technology Officer and OT guy at Delta Technology.
Hi, I'm Jim, the COO and IT guy.
And I'm Craig Duckworth, President and CEO.
You're listening to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider Show.
In each episode, we bring you the inside scoop on the world of industrial cybersecurity.
We talk about everything you don't know
that you should know. So plug in and power up. The show's about to get started.
Hi, my name is Dino Busalachi.
And I'm Craig Duckworth.
So what are we going to talk about today, Craig? Got any questions?
Actually, Dino, yeah, I do. I want to talk about the human factors that are affecting industrial cybersecurity, the lack of people, the skill sets, trying to grow and train, and where do we get them? How do we train them? So I've got a couple questions I'll kind of walk through. We can figure out what makes the most sense. I would say the first thing that we want to look at is cybersecurity awareness. How can organizations create a culture of cybersecurity awareness that permeates all levels of the organization? And that's a big ask. There's a lot to unpack there, but as organizations are trying to determine how to get the skill sets from a CISO and a SOC all the way down to the controls engineer, the plant team that are managing the assets and everything in between. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's a big nut to crack, right? Especially when you're talking about the plant floor industrial control systems. I mean, we've had 2 decades or so of different types of scenarios that have, using your word, permeated from a cybersecurity perspective, awareness. You think about all the social engineering and other tactics that are being used and techniques that are being used and procedures by bad actors, right? So everything, phishing emails, thumb drives that are left in parking lots, ways to scan open networks that aren't protected. And we still find this today, right? We'll find Wi-Fi networks, guest Wi-Fi networks that are connected to the enterprise. But in the manufacturing space, we actually find control systems and the people that work around those control systems using guest Wi-Fi networks and or their phones as hotspots. And so the awareness factor is not known. It's known in the enterprise because they've had this stuff beat down on them. You get the emails that the info security team, SOC team, security sends into to teach people. Not only that, they have training programs that you got to take, especially during the onboarding phase. They test you throughout the year to see if you pick on a phishing email and connect to a link. And then you get the from those guys letting you know that, look, this was a test and you failed. On the OT side, we really don't have that just yet because it's unknown about the issues and challenges that can be disruptive and destructive to the industrial control system environment. And so the training is not there. It's not at all levels. And primarily because a lot of the folks that run these programs, risk and IT, obviously, they're not thinking about the plant floor.
Part of the problem that I see it is as you look at the training, one of the things that is very fresh on my mind from a training perspective and a people is this was in the news and within the last week where one of the largest phishing email companies, KnowBe4, was in the news because they had hired a remote worker from North Korea who had infiltrated into their systems and they were able to catch it and they stopped it before anything happened. But as organizations look to hire remotely, how do you vet that person? How do you ensure that person has the credentials and is not doing something malicious to the clients downstream? And also, to your point just now, how do you train these staff? I look back as a child in school, the training that we did every month for fire drills, for tornado drills, the muscle memory, those items are not happening on the plant floor. They're not happening in the industrial environment to the same degree that safety training is. I know we talk a lot about safety training, and cyber training should be the same equivalent and have the same focus as safety training. How do we get the industry to say, you know what? Yes, this is equally as important and the same emphasis should be placed on it.
Yeah. Well, and on the plant floor, the challenge is you have what I want to call blockades. You have an OEM blockade that will push back if you try to put tools and technologies in place within the machine centers that they're responsible for maintaining and supporting, that they say you can't do that. So they're trying to take your visibility away. The visibility is taken away with technicians who show up on the plant floor, that show up periodically or during incidents that cause them to come out for maintenance purposes. And those guys and gals float into those environments with their machines and connect in wherever they want. And nobody's really looking at their computers, what's on their computer. And you also have machine centers that the myth is that it's not connected. That's what the plant floor tells IT, but IT doesn't really go out there and investigate that. It's almost like they treat it as, this isn't really my problem. It's their problem. And when I say their problem, I'm talking about the plant floor, the OT people's problem to solve, because they're the ones that need the help. And what we find is we had a team that just came back from a trip overseas working in a plant. There were 5 different internet service providers into that plant. Wow. Right. And you also have phones that were being used with hotspots on them. Right. You had machines that were connected to the guest Wi-Fi network. And all of that is, you can say that it's out of IT's purview. And so what can IT do about that? Because they don't have, I talk about a blockade. Well, there's also a blockade between OT and IT. You got the OEMs trying to keep you out, but then you also have OT, your own internal organization, keeping you out. And that being said, and what I don't really have a good finger on the pulse is when OT is telling IT, look, that machine's isolated, where's the due diligence to determine whether that's true or not? Are they just saying that to keep you out of their hair? Or do they believe that? So when you get into this challenge of what's my risk, you're not really studying the connectivity within that environment, right? What those vulnerabilities are, not to the detail. And you have to ask yourself, is it a money issue in a lot of organizations? Because we put a lot of proposals together, and some of them, the money aspect of it's very challenging for a client to fund this.
If the culture is there, if the company believes it's important to them, if the culture is ingrained from the top down, back to the human aspect, then the money will follow. If they're really serious about protecting the environment, protecting the team members, protecting the assets, protecting the organization from malicious actors, from internal process integrity issues, these tools pay for themselves, but the culture has to be there. Someone has to say, this is equally as important to our organization as safety. If you are not performing these things and people change, maybe that plant manager or that controls engineer that brought in one of those 4 or 5 internet connections would say, hey, we already have 3 of these. I don't need another one. Maybe our team can give me access to what I need and won't scold me or won't hinder me or handcuff me. And I can do this the right way because the culture allows for it. Are we ever going to get to that, you think?
They're competing for money, right? Number one. What we're going through right now with one particular client is how do you got to teach the executive who's got to go ask the gatekeepers, right? What do you call it? The Inquisition, to say, okay, we got these issues going on and this is concerning. I know it's going to be an expensive adventure to go in, and when you got hundreds of plants in your fleet, You're talking about millions and millions of dollars. And then I got to go explain this to people. I call it caveman speak, right? It's picture, right? To get them to kind of understand what you're trying to tell them, right? Because you can't get into the weeds with this conversation with the board and the C-suite and expect them to grasp what's going on.
That's why we use PowerPoint.
We've even seen clients that have been hit and have taken weeks of downtime, lost millions of dollars, and still not do anything. And it's like, why are you not doing anything? Because you don't know what to do. You don't know how to do it. You look across your organization and go, we don't have people to do this. We don't have the expertise. We don't have, folks that understand this stuff. But now there's organizations out there such as ours that specialize in this, right? To go help these firms do this. But it's a net new ad. And it's a new skill set. It's a new practice, right? Because you can't always apply the same IT behaviors and tools and policies and procedures on the plant floor as you do in the enterprise. And so you got to train them. They have to understand it. They have to be able to fund for it, because when you put a capital plan together, you're talking about something that could take years to develop and to get the funds that you need. If you're going to build a new plant, if you're putting a new packaging systems or doing a brownfield, the money is set in motion for years, right? And sometimes this stuff doesn't get included into it. But now you need to start ingraining it, which is where I see the OT ecosystem, OEMs and SIs that build these plants, build these control systems, build these machine centers, are going to have to start engaging in bringing tools to the table, just like they put in their VPN concentrators, right? Or their firewall in front of their machine, or whatever network they put in there to think that they're trying to segment the network. They need to get better at putting cybersecurity technologies around that machine that's not only valuable for them as an OEM to determine what can impede and impact that machine center that I am responsible for helping that client maintain and support, right? Do it for yourself as an OEM or system integrator. I'm talking to you guys. If you're building machine centers for your clients, you need to get better at putting tools in there that benefit you to determine what vulnerabilities really do exist in that machine that I just installed. What's that going to look like in a year? What's my remote access look like to that machine? Who's making changes in my control system? What's going on in that plant that my machine center is communicating with? Do I have malware in there already that I need to be concerned about as an OEM that the client's not dealing with? All of those things need to be put on the table to demonstrate, in order for me to do a better job in assisting you to run this piece of equipment, maintain this piece of equipment, I got to bring these tools to the table. And if you want this information, I'm happy to share it with you. If you already have platforms, I'll work with your platform. If you don't have a platform, then I can provide this for you and help you get there. But they're going to have to do this. This is where IT struggles in this game, because they're not the ones building the plant. They're not the ones designing these machine centers. They're not the ones maintaining and operating palletizers and fillers and labelers and robots and reactors and mixing and blending vessels and motor control centers. They're not designing and building those things. IT is not. Correct. It's these OEMs and SIs and the engineering teams that do that. So those groups are the ones that need to help IT, not just turn their back on them and ignore them. So I would say that the time has come now for this ecosystem of OT organizations to start being more engaged around improving cybersecurity postures around the systems that they're designing and building for their clients.
Well, I think part of it is the OT teams that own these assets that are now kind of being drugged, kicking and screaming, or however you want to look at it, into this digital 5.0 or whatever number we're up to today, and how they can begin leveraging a model that IT's been using for outsourcing of talent and resources for a very long time to gain the skill sets and the knowledge and the expertise that they don't have to help guide them as they go down the journey. A lot of the downtime that we see, a lot of the misconfigurations that we see are human error. They're not necessarily malicious. They're not necessarily a bad actor. It's someone that just doesn't recognize the impact of what they're doing on a particular machine center, a particular asset, a device, and it could cause downtime that is costly for the manufacturer.
Yeah. Well, with the inside threats, right, the internal threats to the things that you're describing that are disruptive, those groups weren't born in the realm of cybersecurity mind think, right? They're not thinking around remote access is really a good one, right? Or why would I want to change what I've been doing for decades? And so how do you get around this? And the way to get around it is nobody has large engineering firms anymore. These very large companies used to have hundreds or several hundreds of engineering teams that worked for them to build their plants, maintain their manufacturing facilities. That is so rare. You know, find an organization that's got 400 engineers that work for the organization to manage and maintain and standardize their manufacturing environment. So they're buying stuff, right? The engineer, it's all outsourced already. All the engineering is outsourced to build the machine that you need to produce 1,000 widgets an hour. And so with that mindset, you need to do the same thing with your OT cybersecurity. Is you need to go outside and find organizations that specialize in OT best practices for not only cybersecurity, but back to process integrity, right? Which is very important. It's a component that oftentimes gets overlooked under that big umbrella of the term cybersecurity, right? And most organizations will default that's IT's job.
But it's not on the plant floor. IT can play a role.
They do play a role. They need to.
We want IT to be involved. We want a cooperation between the two departments, but this is not just IT's problem. This is an organizationalist. Everyone, again, back to the culture, everyone has to believe with their heart this is the right thing to do. That's and on the flip side of that, a lot of these OT cybersecurity technologies that have come into the marketplace over the last decade, the team that is selling that stuff is selling to IT. They're not, and their background is IT. Yes,
most of them. And so that's problem number one in my view, because the focus is let's try to get IT involved. Let's get this tool in their hands. Great. And what do we find? We find shelfware. We find a tool that's seeing a third or less of the OT environment. As a matter of fact, in many cases, when we take a look at the tools that they've implemented, it's 85% or more of the assets that are in the OT, right, cybersecurity baseline are IT assets. Mm-hmm. If you got 16 plants and you're picking up 45,000 assets across those 16 plants, and 40 plus thousand of them are IT, that's a problem, right?
The first thing that comes to my mind when I see that is way too much IT noise on the OT network that is hindering operations.
It does. They get alert fatigue, and the amount of information that's there is just it's hard for them to digest. Right? Can't eat the elephant in one bite because they don't know how to break it down, and they don't know how to move that visibility down, and they're not. And then how do you get the IT stuff out of there? Because most of them will sit there and recognize and say, "Oh, we got to get the IT and OT stuff separated before we do anything." Mm-hmm. From a network design perspective, yes. No, you need to put in an OT cybersecurity platform that's going to help you design that network to separate that IT and OT stuff, right? Because that's one of the first things we go after. So you got to get those 40,000 IT assets out of that, and there may be several hundred or a few thousand more OT assets that are still labeled as IT assets, and we need to get into the OT bucket and get them and get it what we call localized, right? Localized meaning that that's truly an OT asset, but the tool's listing as an IT asset because it hasn't thrown an OT protocol yet, or it won't because it's interacting with OT, but it's still using IT protocols. But you can still move it into the environment, right? You can put it in its group. You can put it in its zone. Nobody's doing that. And you need a services organization. And those companies that bought directly from these OT cybersecurity firms aren't really getting support because that's not what they're about, right? Their job is really to develop really good OT cybersecurity technologies. It's not to help you operationalize and tune the tool that you bought within their environment. And that's one of the biggest disconnects that we see when you find IT are the only ones engaged in an OT cybersecurity discussion, right? There's no collaboration, there's no alignment, there's no transparency as far as working together. And so they're not really moving the needle. And if they're not bringing somebody in to help them with that, then they're doing themselves a disservice. So you really have to start asking better questions, especially from an OT perspective. Have IT sit in the room. You want them engaged, but OT needs to start asking these questions of their OEMs and of their SIs and even of their own internal OT teams.
For sure.
What are you guys doing when somebody shows up? Are you scanning their machine to make sure they don't have malware or any viruses before they come into our plant and connect in? Some are doing it, but that's 2 in 10, maybe. That might be doing that. Or you can't use your laptop, you got to use our laptop, which is expensive because when you have control system software, programming software for SCADA systems, for example, that stuff's not cheap, right? And you just can't have laptops laying around that have $20,000 piece of software on it that's not being used. And the engineers that come in to work on that, they're going to bring their stuff. They got their project files. They know everything is structured and organized in their environment. And so they want to use their own piece of equipment to manage that laser cutter that you have. And so you have to start changing your service model, contract agreement between the OEM and the client that says, hey, look, if you're going to put this machine center in this environment, I am going to put a sensor or a collector in there. Or when you build that machine, you're going to put this sensor or collector in there because I want that information to show me the vulnerabilities within that environment and who's communicating with it. Even if you come in and make a parameter change on a control system remotely, Mr. OEM, and all of a sudden I lose my filler for 4 hours, and that just cost me $150,000 of downtime. You want to know who to put your hands on, whose throat that caused that problem. Because right now you don't know. Nobody knows.
It's a guessing game.
Yeah. And the OEM's not going to call themselves out for, the engineer messed up and the programming change that he made shut the line down. Right. So it's those types of discussions where now you have a system that's providing the truth of what actually happened. IT scanned the network and caused the problem. So make a PLC change caused the problem. Again, these are internal, these are disruptive, and it's not a threat from an outside trying to get in there and steal your IP or give you malware. It's just you shooting yourself in the foot, right? And so don't you want to get all the liars in the same room and say the reason why our filler quit working at this particular time was because the engineer came in remotely and made a change to the control system and it messed things up. Or IT was scanning the network, which I don't know why they're doing that. They're not supposed to be doing that. There's a lot of IT groups that think that's perfectly okay. Or because their networks are not configured correctly to keep the IT traffic that they're using to do their due diligence is actually drifting down into the plant floor. And now they're scanning control systems that can't handle that volume of additional traffic or be distracted from their intended operations because their cycle times are so tight that anything that impedes it will cause it to fall, right? Or cause it to stop working and go safe. So it's how do you get into those discussions? And maybe some manufacturers are perfectly fine with disruption. Maybe they are. If they're managing their OEE and they're running in the 70s, they may think that's perfectly fine. Most discrete manufacturers run in the 50s and 60s. So from an OEE perspective, just moving that needle a few percentage points, several percentage points, that's millions and millions of dollars to the bottom line.
Yeah.
So what are you chasing here, per se? And where are you? If you're an organization that's trying to sell plants, mergers and acquisitions, that's your game. You just want to get the plant profitable enough so you can sell it. Well, they're not going to invest in OT cybersecurity practices unless something is really pushing down from a regulatory perspective or the board is really insistent on them doing a better job of protecting that environment. Think about somebody who's buying plants, for example. What due diligence are you going out there to find your end-of-life, end-of-support assets? And do you even have malware in the environment already, which is not uncommon? So you're getting ready to pick up 30 plants from this merger. What work are you really doing to determine what the heck's inside that manufacturing environment?
Yeah.
And we have the technology today, and we have the services today to be able to uncover that stuff and say, here is the truth, the real truth of that plant.
Well, And that comes back to the people aspect as well, the qualified, skilled labor to do that work, to perform those duties, that due diligence, to give the buyer or the seller, both of them, the truth, so that each of them know they're getting a fair deal. If I'm buying, I want to know that I'm paying a fair price. If I'm selling, I want to know I'm getting a fair price. And these tools will give them both that validation. So, but it takes skill sets to do it.
Yeah, well, even if somebody within the IT ranks will say, well, we're just going to implement zero trust. Well, zero trust can work, kind of, right? Because, well, many people think that the plants are static environments. They're not. They're very dynamic, right? And things change. Back to human error, or somebody who's just trying to update a system, and the zero trust that you had in place, all of a sudden what was blocked is now open, or what was open is now blocked, which can cause disruption. When you go through big maintenance activities on the plant and they're living off the land and they're trying to just do all this general maintenance activity, they need connectivity through that environment. And if you have zero trust sitting on them, well, now they can't do the things they need to do. So instead of being down for 3 days and back up on the 4th day, now I'm down for a week, 7, 8, 9, 10 days, because we're not really sure why I can't get the connectivity I need to do the work that I'm doing, right? So zero trust can work, but that really means you have to be really tightly aligned and collaborative in order to determine, okay, changes are happening in the environment or things need to change. And so you might have to mess with that zero trust in order to allow work to be done or production to still operate appropriately. So, but somebody will just say, we'll just throw zero trust on, they'll call it a day, and they think that they're good. And that's just not the case.
Yeah. Well, we've gone way in a lot of different directions, but that's okay. I think that at the end of the day, if organizations are doing something to get better, if they're taking steps to improve their cyber hygiene, then they're going in the right direction. Whether that's zero trust, that's culture, that's people, that's the human factor, which is only one piece of the equation. There are so many items, so many different aspects that can be addressed. You can't eat the elephant in one bite. You have to choose.
You need a strategy. You may have to tier your plants, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I got 150 plants in my fleet. Well, where are your tier 1 plants? What does the supply chain look like in order to make sure that if something happens that becomes a deficit and all of a sudden I can't feed a plant, or I got a plant that's starved out, you got to focus on those when you're thinking about the money aspect. I can't write a check for $25 million right now. No, but you can probably write one for a couple and focus on your tier 1 plants. Yeah. And then in years 3, you can start looking at your tier 2 plants, right? So there's different strategies to apply to figure out what it's going to take to do this. And then finding partners who know how to work in that environment. That's probably the biggest key right now, is you have to have folks that speak a language of both IT and OT and know it well, to either talk to on the IT side and help them, and the same thing with the OT side. It can't be one-sided. It has to be a win-win. It can't be a win-lose.
Totally spot on with that. That is, I would say, the most important message is understanding both sides and how to navigate for a win. Great advice on that. Great topic.
So with that,
until
next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider Podcast. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to cover, please leave us a review or let us know. If you're interested in learning more about Velta technology and how you can get safer sooner, visit veltatech.com. That's BELTA tech.com. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.